I knew the moment I saw Patricia Whitmore's minivan pulling into my driveway that my quiet Saturday afternoon was about to become a headache. I was in the garage organizing my emergency supplies when she knocked on the door frame, her signature tight-lipped smile plastered across her face. Patricia was the president of the Riverside Gardens Homeowners Association in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and she took her position more seriously than most federal judges took theirs. Her highlighted blonde hair was pulled back in what I called her business bun, and she carried her ever-present HOA binder like a holy text. "Quincy Emerson," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I couldn't help but notice you've been making quite a few trips to the hardware store this week." I straightened up from where I'd been checking my generator for the third time that day. "Just doing some storm prep, Patricia. Weather Service says we've got a major system coming through next week." She laughed, actually laughed, like I just told her the funniest joke in the world. "Oh, Quincy, you and your weather obsession. It's Iowa. We get storms all the time. There's no need to be so dramatic about it." I'd lived in Cedar Rapids for 8 years, ever since taking a job as an emergency management consultant. Before that, I'd spent a decade working disaster response across the Midwest. I knew storms, I knew weather patterns, and I definitely knew when something serious was brewing. The meteorological models I'd been tracking all week showed a massive cold front colliding with an unusual moisture system from the Gulf. The result was going to be catastrophic. "This one's different," I said, turning back to my generator. "The National Weather Service is predicting sustained blizzard conditions for at least a week, possibly longer. I'm talking whiteout conditions, power outages, road closures. The works." Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "That's what they always say. Remember last year when they predicted that terrible ice storm and we barely got a dusting? That was because the system moved south at the last minute. This one's locked in place. High-pressure systems on both sides are going to hold it right over eastern Iowa." She stepped further into my garage, her eyes scanning my supplies. I had 50 gallons of gasoline in approved storage containers, 3 months' worth of non-perishable food, bottled water, batteries, medical supplies, and enough firewood to heat my house for weeks. My generator was a top-of-the-line 10,000-watt model that could run my entire house if needed. "This seems excessive," Patricia said, her tone shifting from amused to concerned. "You're not one of those doomsday preppers, are you?" "Because the HOA bylaws clearly state that properties must maintain a certain aesthetic standard, and hoarding supplies could be considered a violation." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that Patricia meant well even when she was being insufferable. "I'm not hoarding anything. I'm being prepared. There's a difference." "Well, I certainly hope you're planning to be a good neighbor and share these supplies if others need them," she said, running her finger along my stack of water cases. "After all, we're a community. That's what Riverside Gardens is all about." Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. "Patricia, is there a specific reason you're here?" She pulled out her binder and flipped through several pages. "As a matter of fact, yes. I'm conducting a survey of all residents to assess their emergency preparedness. The HOA board wants to ensure that everyone in our community has adequate resources." "That's actually a good idea," I said, genuinely surprised. "I'd be happy to help coordinate something. I could run a workshop on emergency prep, help people understand what they really need." "That won't be necessary," Patricia said quickly. "We just need to know what each household has available, in case of emergency, for the greater good of the community." The way she said available made my skin crawl. "You mean you want to know what supplies people have in case you need to ask them to share?" Community cooperation is outlined in Section 12 of the HOA bylaws, Patricia said, tapping her binder. In times of crisis, homeowners are expected to work together for the benefit of all residents. I'd read those bylaws cover to cover before buying my house. Section 12 talks about clearing snow from sidewalks and helping elderly neighbors. It doesn't say anything about commandeering personal property. Patricia's smile tightened. I prefer to think of it as community resource pooling. Now, I can see you have approximately 50 gallons of fuel here. How much are you planning to use personally? All of it, potentially. If the power's out for a week or more, I'll need to run my generator regularly to keep my pipes from freezing and my food from spoiling. Surely you don't need to run it constantly, Patricia said. A few hours a day would be sufficient. That means you'll have excess fuel that could be shared with others. I set down the wrench I'd been holding and turned to face her directly. Patricia, I'm not trying to be difficult, but I bought these supplies with my own money for my own emergency preparedness. If the storm is as bad as I think it's going to be, I'll need every drop of this fuel. Her expression hardened. I see. So you're saying that you'd rather hoard resources while your neighbors suffer in the cold? I'm saying that I warned everyone at the last HOA meeting about preparing for winter emergencies. I sent out a community email with a supply list and local resources. I even offered to help people who needed advice on generator selection. As far as I know, I was the only person who took any of this seriously. Not everyone has the disposable income to spend thousands of dollars on survival gear, Patricia snapped. She wasn't wrong about that, but she wasn't right either. A basic emergency kit costs less than $200. I'm not talking about anything extreme, just water, food, flashlights, batteries, things everyone should have anyway. Patricia made several notes in her binder, her pen scratching aggressively across the paper. I'll be noting in my report that you have significant fuel reserves, but are unwilling to share them with the community. The board will discuss this at our emergency meeting tomorrow. Emergency meeting. About what? About coordinating our response to this alleged major storm you're so worried about, she said. Since you seem to be the expert, I expect you'll attend and provide guidance to your fellow homeowners. I should have said no. I should have told her I had better things to do than waste my Sunday at an HOA meeting. But the truth was, if I could convince even a few of my neighbors to take this seriously, it would be worth it. Fine. What time? 2 o'clock at the community center. Don't be late. She left, and I stood in my garage feeling like I'd just been warned about something I couldn't quite identify. I finished checking my generator, tested it one more time to make sure it would start reliably, and went inside to check the latest weather models. What I saw made my blood run cold. The system had intensified even more than predicted. We weren't looking at a week-long storm anymore. The latest projections showed the system stalling over eastern Iowa for at least 10 days, possibly 2 weeks. Snowfall totals were being estimated at 3 to 5 feet, with wind gusts creating drifts up to 15 feet in some areas. This wasn't just a bad winter storm. This was potentially a historic weather event. I spent the rest of the evening trying to call my neighbors directly. My next-door neighbor, Tom Richardson, thanked me for the heads-up and said he'd pick up some extra groceries. The family across the street didn't answer. Neither did the Hendersons 2 doors down. I left voicemails urging them to take this seriously, but I had no idea if anyone would listen. The next day, I arrived at the community center at exactly 2 o'clock. The room was packed, which surprised me. Usually, HOA meetings drew maybe a dozen people at most. Today, there had to be 40 or 50 residents crowded into the small meeting room. Patricia stood at the front, looking pleased with the turnout. Beside her were the other board members. Vice President Donald Marsh, a retired insurance agent who usually rubber-stamped whatever Patricia wanted. Secretary Karen Wilson, a woman whose name perfectly matched her personality. And Treasurer Frank Chen, the only board member I actually respected. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Patricia began. "As you may have heard, we have a significant winter storm approaching. Some members of our community have taken it upon themselves to stockpile supplies, while others have been left vulnerable and unprepared." I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. "Now, I want to make it clear that the HOA doesn't fault anyone for being prepared," Patricia continued. "However, we live in a community, and communities look out for one another. That's why the board has decided to implement an emergency resource sharing program." Frank Chen shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I noticed he was looking down at his papers rather than at Patricia. "Here's how it will work," Patricia said. "Each household will report their current supply levels to me. This includes food, water, fuel, batteries, and any other emergency resources. If the storm is as severe as some people think," she glanced at me pointedly, "then we'll coordinate the distribution of these resources to ensure everyone has what they need." A woman I recognized as Linda Thompson from 3 streets over raised her hand. "Does this mean if I bought extra supplies, I have to give them away?" "Not give away," Patricia said smoothly. "Share. Temporarily. We'll keep careful records, and once the emergency is over, you'll be compensated fairly for anything you've shared." "Compensated by whom?" I asked. Patricia's smile could have frozen boiling water. "By the HOA emergency fund, of course. We have nearly $8,000 available for community emergencies." Frank cleared his throat. "Actually, Patricia, I need to clarify that. We have $8,000 in the general fund, but it's already allocated for spring landscaping and street sign replacement. We'd need a full board vote to reallocate those funds." "Then we'll hold a vote," Patricia said dismissively. "I'm sure everyone agrees that a weather emergency takes precedence over landscaping." I stood up. "Can I say something?" Patricia looked like she wanted to refuse, but too many people were already nodding. "Of course, Quincy, please share your expertise with us." I ignored her sarcasm and addressed the room. "First, I want to be clear that I genuinely hope I'm wrong about this storm. I'd love nothing more than to end up with a garage full of supplies I don't need. But the meteorological data I'm seeing suggests this is going to be worse than anything we've experienced in decades." I pulled out my phone and brought up the National Weather Service website. "The NWS is now predicting sustained blizzard conditions for 10 to 14 days. That's not just snow. That's whiteout conditions, sub-zero temperatures, and near certainty of prolonged power outages. Roads will be impassable. Emergency services will be severely limited. For at least a week, possibly 2, we're going to be on our own." The room had gone very quiet. I saw fear starting to register on faces. "If you haven't already prepared, you need to do it now," I continued. "Today. Go to the store and buy water, non-perishable food, batteries, flashlights, candles, matches. If you have a fireplace, get firewood. If you have a generator, get fuel and make sure it works. Fill your bathtubs with water before the storm hits. Charge every electronic device you own. Make sure you have any medications you need." "This is exactly the kind of fear-mongering we don't need," Karen Wilson interrupted. "You're scaring people." "Good," I said bluntly. "They should be scared. Being scared might save their lives." "That's enough, Quincy," Patricia said. "You've made your point. Now let's talk about the practical matter of resource allocation. I'd like to start with you. How much fuel do you currently have?" I'd spent all night thinking about how to handle this. "Patricia, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but you can't force people to surrender their private property. That's not how any of this works. The HOA bylaws don't give you the authority to confiscate anything, I said firmly. I've consulted with a lawyer. What you're proposing could actually constitute theft or illegal seizure, depending on how it's implemented. That was a bluff. I hadn't actually talked to a lawyer yet, but I'd spent several hours reading Iowa property law online. Patricia's face flushed red. I am not proposing theft. I'm proposing that we work together as a community. Then propose it as voluntary, I said. Ask people if they're willing to share. Keep track of who needs what. Coordinate mutual aid. That's fine. That's actually admirable, but you can't mandate it and you definitely can't enforce it. Frank Chen was nodding. He's right, Patricia. We should make this a voluntary program. Patricia looked like she'd bitten into a lemon. Fine. Voluntary. But I certainly hope that everyone in this room will remember who was willing to help their neighbors and who wasn't. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. People started shouting questions. How much food should they buy? What if the stores ran out? Should they leave town before the storm hit? Patricia tried to regain control but failed miserably. Eventually, she just started shouting over everyone that they'd reconvene after the storm passed, and everyone should submit their supply lists to her by email. I left the community center with a knot in my stomach. The storm was now less than 48 hours away, and most of these people still didn't understand what was coming. I spent Monday making my final preparations. I filled every container I owned with water. I brought in extra firewood and stacked it in my garage where it would stay dry. I tested my generator again, ran it for an hour to make sure everything worked perfectly, then topped off its fuel tank. I moved my most essential supplies to my first floor so I wouldn't have to navigate stairs in the dark if the power went out. I charged my phone, my laptop, my portable battery packs, and even my old camping lanterns. By Monday evening, the first flakes were starting to fall. By Tuesday morning, the world was white. The snow came down so hard I couldn't see my neighbor's house 50 feet away. The wind howled like something alive, rattling my windows and piling snow against my door. The temperature dropped to -15 before accounting for wind chill. And at exactly 3:30 in the afternoon, my lights flickered twice and went out. I'd been expecting it, so I wasn't worried. I went to my garage, started my generator, and within minutes had power restored to my essential circuits. I'd had an electrician install a transfer switch years ago specifically for this purpose. I could run my furnace, my refrigerator, some lights, and my internet router on generator power indefinitely as long as I had fuel. The first knock on my door came at 6 o'clock that evening. It was Tom Richardson from next door, bundled in so many layers he looked twice his normal size. Snow clung to his eyebrows and beard. "Hey, Quincy," he said, stamping his feet. "I hate to bother you, but our power's out and I was wondering if you had a portable heater or something we could borrow." I invited him inside. "Your whole house is without power." "Yeah, I thought it would come back on after a few hours, but it's been over 2 hours now and nothing." "It's probably going to be out for days, Tom, maybe longer. The power company can't get crews out in this weather." His face fell. "Days, but our house is already getting cold. We've got the kids bundled up, but—" Tom had 3 kids, I remembered, all under 10 years old. "Okay, listen," I said. "I can't give you my generator, but I can help you. Do you have a fireplace?" "Yeah, but no wood." I kept meaning to order some and just never got around to it. I thought about my carefully stocked woodpile. If the storm lasted 2 weeks, I'd need most of it. But Tom had kids. "Come on," I said. "I'll give you enough to get through tonight." Tomorrow, When there's a break in the snow, you can see if you can find more." His relief was palpable. "Thank you. God, thank you so much." I loaded him up with an armful of firewood, some candles, and a couple of battery-powered lanterns I had as backups. "Keep one room warm," I instructed. "Probably the living room if that's where your fireplace is. Hang blankets over the doorways to keep the heat in. Keep the kids in that room as much as possible. What do we do about food? Our fridge is already warming up. Put anything that needs to stay cold outside. It's well below freezing. Your back porch will work better than a refrigerator right now. Cook on the fireplace if you need to. And Tom, ration your food. Make it last. This storm isn't ending anytime soon." He nodded, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He was starting to understand. The second knock came at 8 o'clock. It was the Hendersons from 2 doors down. They didn't have a fireplace. Their house was all electric. They were getting desperate. I gave them my 2 spare space heaters and a long extension cord. "You can run these off my generator for a few hours each day," I said. "Come by in the morning and we'll set up a schedule." The third knock came at 10 o'clock, then the fourth at 11. Then 3 people showed up together at midnight. By Wednesday morning, I had a line of people at my door. And standing at the front of that line, looking imperious despite being covered in snow, was Patricia Whitmore. "Quincy," she said, "we need to talk about fuel sharing." I was exhausted. I'd been up most of the night helping neighbors, and my generator had been running continuously. I'd already burned through 5 gallons of fuel, and it had only been 18 hours. "Patricia, it's not even daylight yet. Can this wait?" "No, it cannot. There are families in this neighborhood who are freezing. I know you have fuel to spare." "I don't have fuel to spare. I have fuel I need to survive the next 2 weeks." She pushed past me into my house. I was too tired to stop her. "Your house is warm, you have lights. You clearly have more than enough power for one person." Because I prepared. Because I spent money and time getting ready for exactly this situation. "And now you have a moral obligation to help others," Patricia said. She wasn't asking. She was telling me. "I am helping others. I gave Tom firewood. I'm letting the Hendersons run space heaters off my generator. I've given out batteries, food, water. What more do you want? I want you to provide fuel for the community generators. That stopped me cold." "What community generators?" "Karen Wilson's husband has a generator, so does Frank Chen. But they don't have fuel. You do. If you give them fuel, they can keep their houses warm and invite other neighbors over to warm up." I rubbed my eyes, trying to think through the exhaustion. "How much fuel are we talking about?" 10 gallons each should be sufficient." "That's 20 gallons. That's nearly half my supply." "You'll get it back," Patricia said. "The HOA will compensate you once this is all over." "With what money?" "Frank said the emergency fund is already allocated. We'll figure it out. This is an emergency, Quincy. People are suffering." I looked past her to where the line of neighbors still waited outside my door. I could see Linda Thompson holding a small child bundled in blankets. Old Mr. Peterson from the corner house leaning heavily on his cane. The Chang family huddled together against the wind. I was so angry I could barely speak. Angry at Patricia for putting this on me. Angry at my neighbors for not preparing. Angry at myself for caring too much to say no. "Fine," I said. 10 gallons total, 5 each. That's all I can spare." 20 gallons, Patricia insisted. 10 each. 5 each or nothing. That's the offer. Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. "The board will remember your lack of community spirit." "The board can go to hell," I said, too tired to be diplomatic. 5 gallons each. Take it or leave it." She took it. I siphoned 10 gallons from my precious supply into 2 containers and handed them over. Patricia didn't thank me. She just took the fuel and left. The storm raged on. Wednesday became Thursday, became Friday. The snow never stopped, not for more than an hour or two at a time. The drifts grew taller than my first-floor windows. The temperature stayed below zero, and the power stayed off. I fell into a routine. I ran my generator for 4 hours in the morning, 4 hours in the evening. That was enough to keep my pipes from freezing and preserve my food. During the off hours, I bundled up in layers and used my fireplace to keep at least one room warm. My neighbors came and went. I let people charge their phones from my power. I shared what food I could spare. I gave medical advice when someone's kid got sick. I became, without wanting to be, the center of the neighborhood's survival efforts, and I watched my fuel supply dwindle. By Sunday, 6 days into the storm, I was down to 20 gallons. That should have been enough for another week if I was careful. But Sunday afternoon, Patricia showed up again. "We need more fuel," she said without preamble. "No, Quincy, please. Karen's generator ran out. Without heat, her pipes froze and burst. Her basement is flooding." I closed my eyes. A burst pipe in this weather was catastrophic. The water would freeze, causing more damage. The house would be uninhabitable. Where's she going to stay? With Frank Chen. But that means his generator needs to run more to keep everyone warm. He's out of fuel. "What happened to the 10 gallons I gave you?" Patricia looked away. "It's gone. Both generators used more than we expected." "Because you ran them constantly instead of rationing power like I told you to. These are people's lives, Quincy. And this is my survival we're talking about. The storm isn't even half over, Patricia. The weather service is now saying it could last 3 full weeks. 3 weeks. Do you understand what that means?" Her face had gone pale. 3 weeks. The system stalled. It's not moving. We're going to be snowed in for potentially another 2 weeks. I need every drop of fuel I have left. "Please," Patricia said, and for the first time she wasn't being imperious or demanding. She was begging. Just 5 more gallons, just enough to get Frank through another few days. I thought about Karen Wilson and her family. I thought about the people sheltering in Frank's house. I thought about how quickly just 5 gallons could turn into just 5 more and then just 5 more after that. 5 gallons, I said. "But Patricia, this is the last time. I mean it. After this, I can't help anyone. I'll barely have enough to make it through myself." "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." I gave her the fuel and watched her trudge away through snow that was now up to her thighs. My garage, once full of carefully organized supplies, looked bare. My fuel containers, once full and heavy, were mostly empty. The second week was worse than the first. The snow kept falling. The cold intensified, and people started getting desperate. On Tuesday, 11 days into the storm, someone tried to break into my garage. I woke at 2 in the morning to the sound of scraping metal. Someone was trying to pry open my garage side door. I grabbed my baseball bat and my brightest flashlight and went to investigate. The man trying to break in was Dale Morrison, who lived 3 streets over. I'd seen him at HOA meetings but never really talked to him. He was a big guy, over 6 feet, with hands like ham hocks. In the beam of my flashlight, he looked gaunt and desperate. "Step away from my garage," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Dale turned, squinting in the light. "I just need some fuel, man. My family is freezing." "So ask." "Don't break in." "I did ask. 3 days ago, you said no." He was right. I had said no. By that point, I'd already given away half my fuel supply and I'd needed to preserve what was left. "I can't help you, Dale. I barely have enough for myself." "You've been running your generator every day," he said. "I can hear it. You've got power and heat while my kids are sleeping in sleeping bags in front of a dying fire." The guilt was crushing, but I couldn't give in. "I'm rationing what I have." running my generator just enough to keep my pipes from freezing. "I don't believe you," Dale said. "Everyone knows you had 50 gallons. You must still have some left." "I gave most of it away. To Patricia and the others. I have maybe 10 gallons left. That's enough to last me another week if I'm lucky." "Give me 5 gallons," Dale said. It wasn't a request. I raised the baseball bat. I hated myself for doing it, but I was scared and exhausted and running on empty in every sense of the word. "Go home, Dale." "My kids, I know," I said, and I meant it. "I know. But I can't save everyone. I can barely save myself. Go home." He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something break in his eyes. Then he turned and waded back into the snow, disappearing into the darkness. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in my living room with my baseball bat across my knees, listening for any sound of someone returning. When dawn finally came, gray and dim through the endless snow, I went to check my garage. My locks were intact. My fuel was still there. All 10 gallons of it, sitting in the corner like liquid gold. I'd never felt more like a monster. Wednesday brought a brief respite. The snow stopped for nearly 6 hours, and the wind died down enough that visibility improved. People emerged from their houses like survivors crawling from bunkers. The neighborhood looked like an alien landscape. Snow had drifted as high as the rooflines in some places. Cars were buried completely. The streets were impassable. I ventured out to check on Tom Richardson. His house was cold but livable. The kids were okay, though they were getting cabin fever. His wife, Rachel, looked exhausted. "How much longer?" she asked me. I didn't want to tell her, but she deserved the truth. "At least another week, maybe more," her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know if we can make it another week." I gave her the last of my extra batteries and 2 cans of soup from my dwindling supply. It wasn't much, but it was something. Walking back to my house, I saw Frank Chen outside his place, trying to dig out his generator exhaust vent. I went to help him. "Thanks," he said, breathing hard from the effort. "How are you holding up?" "Running on fumes," I said. Literally, Frank grimaced. "I heard about Dale Morrison trying to break into your garage. News traveled fast, apparently." "Yeah, that was fun." "I don't blame you for protecting what's yours," Frank said. "But Quincy, people are getting desperate. It's only going to get worse." "I know. But what am I supposed to do? I can't feed and heat the entire neighborhood." "No, but maybe we can organize better, pool resources more efficiently." "I still have some food. Mrs. Patterson has a working fireplace and plenty of wood now. The Johnsons have a camping stove and propane. If we coordinate better, we might stretch what we have." It was a good idea. It was what Patricia should have been doing from the start instead of trying to guilt me into surrendering all my supplies. "Okay," I said. "Let's call a meeting. Tonight at your place, since you have the most room. Spread the word." That evening, about 20 people crowded into Frank's house. It was the most I'd seen gathered since the storm started. Everyone looked haggard, worn thin by cold and stress and fear. Patricia was there, sitting in the corner with Karen Wilson. They both looked at me with barely concealed hostility. Frank took charge of the meeting. "We need to be smarter about how we're managing resources," he said. "Right now, everyone's just trying to survive on their own, but if we work together, we can do better." We spent the next 2 hours taking inventory. Who had what? Who needed what? We set up a rotation system for Frank's generator so multiple families could benefit from the heat in shifts. We identified people who had extra food and arranged for it to be distributed to those who were running low. We set up a buddy system so people checked on each other daily. It was what should have happened from the beginning. It might have been enough if we'd started earlier. But on Thursday morning, 14 days into the storm, my generator wouldn't start. I'd been running it hard for 2 weeks straight. Even with maintenance and care, that kind of continuous use takes a toll. I checked everything I could think of. The fuel was fine. The oil was good. The spark plug looked okay. But when I pulled the starter cord, nothing happened. Not even a sputter. I had heat. I had power. And now I had no way to generate either. The temperature inside my house began to drop immediately. I lit my fireplace and moved everything I needed into the living room. I knew the drill. I'd helped my neighbors through this. Now I was living it myself. By Thursday afternoon, my house was 40 degrees. By evening, it was below freezing in every room except the living room, which I managed to keep around 50 degrees with the fireplace. I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't bear to. I'd been the prepared one, the expert. The guy who had everything under control. Admitting that my generator had failed felt like admitting I'd failed. Friday morning, I woke to the sound of running water. For a moment, I was confused. Then I realized what it meant. My pipes had frozen and burst. I found the breach in my basement. Water was spraying from a broken pipe in the ceiling, already forming stalactites of ice. I had no way to stop it. I had no way to fix it. All I could do was shut off the main water line and hope the damage wasn't too extensive. Without water, without power, without heat except for the dying fire in my living room, I finally understood what my neighbors had been going through. And I was down to my last 3 gallons of fuel, which I couldn't even use because my generator was broken. That's when Patricia came back. She knocked on my door Friday afternoon, and when I opened it, she had 5 other people with her. All board members or their representatives. "We need to talk," Patricia said. They came inside without waiting for an invitation. They stood in my frigid hallway, looking around at my house that was barely warmer than outside. "Your generator's broken," Patricia said. "It wasn't a question. How did you know?" "Because I haven't heard it running, and because your house is as cold as everyone else's now." I waited for her to gloat, to say I told you so, to point out that I'd hoarded supplies and now couldn't even use them. Instead, she said, "How much fuel do you have left?" 3 gallons. "Why? Frank's generator is still working. If you give him that fuel, it'll keep his place warm for another day. That means Karen's family, the Thompsons, and old Mr. Peterson all stay warm." I stared at her. "You want me to give away my last 3 gallons of fuel? You can't use it. Your generator's broken." But that fuel could save lives. She was right. I hated that she was right, but she was. "And what happens to me?" I asked. Patricia's expression softened. "You come stay at Frank's like everyone else. We take care of you like you've been taking care of everyone else." Something in my chest unclenched. I hadn't realized how alone I'd been feeling, how much pressure I'd put on myself to be the solution to everyone's problems. "Okay," I said. "Take the fuel, I'll pack a bag." The next week was the hardest of my life. 17 people crowded into Frank Chen's house, living in shifts around his generator's run schedule. We rationed food carefully. We shared blankets and body heat. We told stories to keep the kids entertained. We survived. The storm finally broke on day 22. 3 weeks and 1 day after it had started, the snow stopped falling. The sun came out. The temperature climbed above freezing for the first time in nearly a month. Power company crews started working their way through Cedar Rapids. It took them 3 more days to reach Riverside Gardens. When my power finally came back on, I sat in my cold, damaged house and cried. The next few weeks were chaos. Insurance adjusters, repair crews, FEMA representatives. The storm had caused hundreds of millions of dollars in damage across eastern Iowa. Dozens of people had died, mostly from carbon monoxide poisoning or exposure. Riverside Gardens had been lucky. We'd all survived, but the HOA wasn't done with me yet. 6 weeks after the storm ended, I received a certified letter from Patricia Whitmore. It was a bill for $1,800, representing my share of the community emergency expenses. According to the itemized list, I owed money for fuel, food, and services provided during the storm. I called Frank Chen immediately. "Did you get one of these?" "Yeah," he said, sounding tired. Everyone did. Patricia's trying to recoup the HOA emergency fund by billing residents directly. But I gave away over half my fuel supply. I helped dozens of people, and now she wants me to pay. She's billing everyone the same amount, regardless of what they contributed. She says it's only fair. Fair. The word made me want to scream. I wasn't the only one who was angry. Within a week, a petition started circulating to remove Patricia from the board. Within 2 weeks, it had enough signatures to trigger a special election. Within a month, Patricia Whitmore was voted out as HOA president, along with Karen Wilson. Frank Chen became the new president. One of his first acts was to void all the emergency bills Patricia had sent out. His second act was to start a real community emergency preparedness program with voluntary training sessions and shared resource planning. He asked me to help coordinate it. I said yes, but the story didn't end there. In early April, I got a call from the Cedar Rapids Police Department. They wanted to talk to me about the fuel I'd given away during the storm. Apparently, Patricia Whitmore had filed a police report claiming that I'd illegally hoarded essential supplies during an emergency and refused to share them with the community. She was trying to have me charged with some obscure Iowa statute about failure to render aid. I sat in an interview room at the police station, explaining everything to Detective Morrison. Yes, the same last name as Dale who tried to break into my garage. His brother, as it turned out. "Let me get this straight," Detective Morrison said. "You spent thousands of dollars preparing for this storm. You warned everyone it was coming. You offered to help people prepare. And when the storm hit, you gave away more than half your supplies to your neighbors." "Yes." "And Patricia Whitmore is claiming you hoarded supplies and refused to help people, apparently." Detective Morrison closed his notebook. "Mr. Emerson, I'm not going to charge you with anything. What you did was admirable. What Miss Whitmore is doing is wasting police resources because she's mad about being voted out of her HOA position." I felt relief wash over me. "Thank you. But I do want to talk to you about my brother," he said. "Dale Morrison. He tried to break into your garage during the storm." My stomach dropped. "Are you going to arrest me for threatening him?" "No, I'm going to apologize on his behalf. He was desperate and scared and he did something stupid. But he told me how you could have really hurt him and you didn't. You just sent him home. That took restraint." "His kids needed him," I said. "I wasn't going to do anything that might leave them without a father." Detective Morrison shook my hand. "You're a good man, Quincy Emerson." 2 weeks later, Patricia Whitmore and Karen Wilson were both charged with filing false police reports. They each paid a fine and were required to write formal apologies to me. I never cashed Patricia's check for her apology letter. I framed it instead and hung it in my garage. The last piece fell into place in June. The HOA's insurance company finished their investigation into Patricia's management of the emergency fund. Turns out, she'd spent nearly $3,000 of HOA money on her own supplies before the storm, then tried to hide it by billing residents afterward to replenish the fund. She and Karen Wilson were both sued by the HOA for misappropriation of funds. They settled out of court, repaying the money plus damages. As part of the settlement, they were permanently banned from serving in any HOA leadership position. Life in Riverside Gardens slowly returned to normal. Houses were repaired, lawns greened up, kids played outside again, but something had changed. People waved more, stopped to chat, checked on their neighbors. And when I started offering emergency preparedness workshops in Frank Chen's garage on Saturday mornings, 20 people showed up to the first one. By the third workshop, we had over 50 attendees. The following winter, when the weather service predicted another major storm, Riverside Gardens was ready. Most houses had generators. Everyone had emergency supplies. We had a community coordination plan. And when the storm hit, less severe but still significant, we weathered it together without drama or conflict. I was in my garage one Saturday in March, reorganizing my supplies after that winter storm when Tom Richardson stopped by. "Hey, Quincy," he said. "I wanted to thank you again for everything you did during the big storm. You probably saved my kids' lives." "You would have figured it out," I said. "Maybe, but I'm glad I didn't have to." He held out a gas can. "This is 5 gallons, to replace what you gave us during the storm." "Tom, you don't have to, I know. But I want to, and I'm not the only one." Over the next week, 6 different neighbors stopped by with gas cans. 5 gallons here, 10 gallons there. By the end of the week, I had more fuel than I'd started with before the storm. Frank Chen was the last to visit. He brought 10 gallons and a bottle of very good whiskey. "From the HOA," he said, "with our genuine gratitude." We sat on my porch sipping whiskey and watching the sun set over Riverside Gardens. "Think we'll get another storm like that?" Frank asked. "Eventually," I said. "Maybe not next year. Maybe not for 10 years, but it'll happen again. And when it does, we'll be ready." "Yeah," I agreed. "We will." I thought about Patricia Whitmore and her attempts to control and coerce. I thought about Dale Morrison, desperate enough to break into my garage. I thought about all the people who'd suffered during those 3 weeks, and all the ways we'd managed to survive together. Emergency preparedness isn't just about having supplies. It's not about hoarding resources or being able to say, "I told you so," when disaster strikes. It's about community. Real community, built on mutual respect and voluntary cooperation, not mandates and guilt. I learned that lesson the hard way, shivering in Frank Chen's living room with 16 other people, sharing our last cans of soup and keeping each other's spirits up through the darkest, coldest days. And I wouldn't trade that knowledge for anything, not even 50 gallons of fuel and a working generator. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky orange and pink. Frank raised his glass. "To preparation," he said. "To community," I countered. We clinked glasses and drank, and in that moment, I felt truly home in Riverside Gardens for the first time since I'd moved there 8 years earlier. Sometimes it takes a disaster to show you what really matters. Sometimes it takes 3 weeks of blizzard conditions and sub-zero temperatures. Sometimes it takes losing everything you thought you needed to discover what you actually had all along. I had neighbors who cared. I had a community that learned from its mistakes. I had a second chance to do things right. And I had enough fuel in my garage to run my generator for a month if I ever needed to. But more importantly, I knew that if I ever ran out, if disaster struck again and my supplies failed, I wouldn't be facing it alone. None of us would. We'd weathered one storm together. We could weather another. The whiskey was smooth, the evening was warm, and for the first time in months I felt at peace. Patricia Whitmore and her demands were history. The storm was over, and spring was finally here. Frank eventually headed home, and I sat on my porch a while longer, watching the stars come out. My phone buzzed with a text from the community preparedness group I'd started. Someone was asking about the best brands of emergency radios. Someone else was sharing a sale on non-perishable food at the local Costco. Another person posted pictures of their newly installed generator. I smiled and typed out responses, offering advice and encouragement. This was what community was supposed to look like. Not mandates and forced sharing, but people choosing to help each other because it was the right thing to do. Inside my house, the heat worked perfectly. My pipes were repaired. My generator sat ready in the garage, serviced and maintained. My shelves were stocked with supplies, enough for me and some to share if needed. But the real preparation, the kind that mattered most, wasn't in my garage or my basement. It was in the relationships I'd built with my neighbors, in the trust we'd developed through crisis, in the knowledge that we'd survived together and could do it again. That was worth more than any amount of fuel, any generator, any stockpile of supplies. That was the real emergency preparedness. That was what I should have been focusing on all along. As I finally headed inside for the night, I looked back at Riverside Gardens one more time. Lights glowed warmly in windows up and down the street. Families were safe inside, probably sitting down to dinner or watching TV or putting kids to bed. Normal life resumed after being put on hold for 3 weeks. We'd made it. We'd all made it, and we were stronger for it. I locked my door, checked that my generator was ready just in case, and settled in for the night. Tomorrow I'd help the Hendersons winterize their attic. Next week, I was teaching a workshop on emergency food storage. The week after that, we were having a community potluck to celebrate Frank's first 100 days as HOA president. Life was good. Life was normal. Life was exactly what it should be in a real community, the kind that looked out for each other not because they were forced to, but because they chose to. And if another storm came, whether next week or next year or next decade, we'd face it together. Not under Patricia Whitmore's forced sharing program, not through guilt and coercion, but through genuine mutual aid and community support. That was the lesson of the 3-week storm. That was what I'd learned in those cold, dark days when everything seemed hopeless. And that was worth every gallon of fuel I'd given away, every can of soup I'd shared, every hour I'd spent helping my neighbors survive. I'd started that winter as the guy with all the supplies. I'd ended it as part of a real community. That was the best trade I'd ever made.